welcome to Ask an Angel. And
Thank
today,
you.
very excited to have you join us, Cal, because we've been doing lots of other things in the background. So even more exciting to kind of dive in and explore more about yourself and the business and things you've been doing. So to start off, the best way is to give us a little bit of background on yourself, kind of where you've come from, where you're at, where you're going, and then one thing about you that nobody would know.
All right, that sounds like fun. So I actually started my career more at big companies like Wells Fargo Bank and Visa and Price Waterhouse. And so did the Fortune 100 executive thing. But midway through my career, I realized I think I would have more fun on the entrepreneurial track. So from that, I went to several real estate tech startups for many, many years. And soup to nuts, did all kinds of things when I reinvented myself, that I was doing product and then, online marketing and strategy and so forth. And just had a grand old time just being an entrepreneur at several startups. And then later, and probably about 7 years ago, I got involved with an alumni angel group called Berkeley Angel Network, which is obviously, as the name indicates, an angel group for, of, and by UC Berkeley alums, which gave me my first exposure to the other side. And so I've been doing some angel investing through them and through other organizations, and kind of learned from the ground up how to do, the deal flow vetting, doing due diligence, working with the startups to get them ready for pitch events and so forth. And through that, I basically got embedded in sort of the angel investing scene in the Bay Area, connected with a group from Sandhill Angels that started an accelerator in Berkeley called Batchery, which now is 5 years in, 12th cohort, about 150 companies graduated. So I started as a limited partner, and then over time I became one of the managing partners and then CEO, and then I helped develop the curriculum and the program, which really just gave me a good feel for how do you coach and train startups to succeed, and handed off day-to-day operations on that a few years ago, and then switched to another accelerator where we had another analytical framework to assess startups, and kind of rambling here, but very quickly, what I'm doing now is a company called DealEngine, DealEngine.ai, which does analytics on startup success. So basically think of it as the TurboTax for startups, where we collect a lot of data, crunch numbers, give quantified feedback back to the startups, as well as generating deal scores and team scores for the benefit of investors. And basically our Northern Light is, the elephant in the room with VC is that overall the industry has something like a 90% portfolio failure rate. So if we can use data science to de-risk startups from the earliest stage and even get the success rate from 10% to 20%, we have a chance to disrupt the industry. So we're in beta now and very excited about working with startups and just using data to help them get better.
I love it. And one thing about you that we wouldn't know.
Okay, let's see. Believe it or not, I am also a Sundance nominated filmmaker because I produced a mockumentary short. Again, I couldn't leave my roots of startups. So I did a mockumentary about the worst possible startup in the world called icevan.com, and made it to a few film festivals, including Sundance, which, God, if being a filmmaker could be a little bit more lucrative, I might stay in that, but God, I had a lot of fun doing that.
It was called icevan.com?
Icevan. So think about way back in the day, there was Webvan. And then we said, what's even worse than, the worst of the worst? So delivering bags of ice guaranteed in an hour. We almost did it about cinder blocks, but we basically created Icevan for, the company that delivers ice.
And that was the worst?
At least that's the best thing we could have come up with. This was, some 20 years ago. I bet if we kind of brainstorm now and got really into non-fungible tokens, we can say, let's have some NFTs for ice. Yep. And it can probably get exponentially worse with some of the later technologies we have.
It was just popping in my head because I remember I was going through, I think it was Vietnam, and there's, like a tuk-tuk, but it was kind of like a buggy with a bike on the front, but it was carrying a buggy, and it was an ice buggy. And they'd go along every morning, and everybody would come out at 4 or 5 in the morning, and grab their big cinder blocks of ice, and they had a little chainsaw, and they would just zip through and drop these blocks out in front of all the stores because they had to keep their beer cold. So that was how they would do that. Yeah. So this guy would just literally drive around the blocks and just drop off ice, and it would go on, I think, a couple times during the day, and it would just be big cylinder blocks of ice. And then they would sit there with a pick, and then they would put their beer on it and everything else. But that's how they delivered it. I don't know what they charged for it, but I remember that specifically because I was taking pictures of it. I thought this was a, great little business run, and yeah, it was pretty cool.
Well, that's awesome. That actually tells me maybe there's even hope still for ice fans someday.
100%. Yes. Especially these hot climates where they can't, the streets are too narrow, or they're really just made for, they're doing this on Yonge Street, where they're turning them into, they're reducing it down to 1-in-1 lanes for a certain extension. And that way they'll have more sidewalk sales, more people walking on the sidewalks, opening them up. It's not going to be like as much as it should be. I think they should open up all of Yonge Street and get rid of cars on the whole street. But then it kind of breaks traffic going obviously east and west. But in saying that, like, when you're in Barcelona, you've got all of these major streets that are just completely shut down and they're just walkable, right? And you have that in a lot of Portugal. You have them everywhere, right? And those are big commerce streets. So when you don't have that opportunity, you got to move things around, and that's the only way you could get ice around. So I thought it was a pretty cool business model back then.
So you never know. I mean, there is a market need for just about anything somewhere in the world.
Yep. I always just say that was that I was in the Philippines because I have a company there. This was, again, this instance was probably 15 years ago. And we were at a golf course, and I was meeting with some business executives with my business partner at the time. And we went into, it was a golf range. So we were having a drink and just teeing balls off. And it kind of hit me that there is a job in this world for everybody. If you're willing to do the job and get paid for it, you can do anything you want. And then it's your decision if you're going to take it to something of a different level.
Yes.
And I learned that there because as right or wrong as the environment was, which it bothered me at the time because I didn't really like it, but I was looking at it from the entrepreneurship side, is that there was a lady that was serving drinks, but then there was also a lady that was teeing up the golf balls. And they would build them like just by hand. And that's how they did it. And that was their job. And then you paid them at the end of doing that. So they didn't use tees. They used this granular soil that would tee up enough to hold the ball on it. And then you paid that person at the end of the day for all of the balls you teed off, and you had to pay a certain amount of money.
Wow, so there we go.
And I thought, well, it's actually pretty clever because they probably thought originally I should charge you for the tees, or I could use a plastic one, or I can create a job, and this person will just own this whole front field and make sure everybody's taken care of.
There we go. Yeah, to each his own. And there is just because it doesn't work in one market doesn't mean that somewhere else in the world it wouldn't thrive just like you saw.
Exactly. So, but I love the concept. I want to actually look this up. I'm going to check this out because I'd love to see the
document. You'll find the video if you just go to icefan.com. Up until recently, it actually, believe it or not, was a post-revenue, quasi-profitable company because I just turned it into an Amazon affiliate site. And, it was post-revenue, making about $20 a month and at least paid for hosting costs. Which, better than a lot of startups back in the day. I think it broke now. So you can still get to the video, but unfortunately, I can't monetize you right now.
Oh, that's okay. That's still awesome, though. I love it. I love it. So there's lots of little avenues and things that I want to touch on, but I guess to go back to your kind of origination on where you've kind of come from, I think a lot of this obviously speaks to where you are today. But being through that banking sector and how you operated and function on that side of it, how much of those elements that you learned really do you feel have fit into what you're doing today? From the financials, the marketing, like how you did things? Do you think it kind of paved the way for where you decided to take that leap of faith?
You know what? I think I took a more unusual path than others because I started my career at a conservative accounting firm where I was doing litigation consulting, and then a very fiscally conservative bank at that time, Wells Fargo Bank. And because I started off in finance and really thinking about building business cases and financial models to justify any initiative, I mean, literally, if you wanted a new coffee maker at Wells Fargo, you'd have to write a business case for it. So it kind of established a fiscally conservative discipline at my roots, which still, I sometimes had to reconcile with sort of the entrepreneurial side, which I don't think I was ever as quite the taking a blind leap like some founders do, that I would still try to apply some sort of fiscal or financial modeling discipline and just needing a business case for the ventures I pursued, invested in, companies I worked with, that I tended to be a little bit more of a pain in the butt, just getting into the numbers, which granted, knowing that founders early on will say, well, these numbers are kind of made up anyway, can we just kind of ignore them? I said, well, yes, when we look back at this in 2 or 3 years, you'll probably be completely wrong. But this is still the best financial snapshot of where you're heading. And it should be a good mirror of your staffing plan, your operational plan, your sales and marketing plan. And let's just see if it makes numerical sense, if there's any credibility. And so that has actually influenced a lot of the models that we are developing now. It's just, can you talk coherently, even if it's going to change, you're going to pivot 12 times between now and 2 years from now, just make sure that it's coherent and that it's credible. And I think that's one of the things that's really influenced me up until now and probably going forward as well.
And do you think a lot of that, like those kind of metrics and doing the case studies and learning, or the use cases, learning about how to obviously raise funds to get a new coffee maker, do you think that really propelled your experimental side of things on how you can help startups really engineer and understand the startup? Because I do think a lot of the time it's not so much like, hey, go build this model and it's going to be completely wrong and it's going to pivot. It's more of the understanding that you can actually get comfortable and know how to innovate inside of a spreadsheet or inside of this metrics to come up with, hey, here's where I'm really at. And oh my God, I didn't realize I was really here. When I thought about it, I was doing way better than maybe when I'm putting on paper, and geez, I really need to go back and look at this, or I don't even understand how this works, and going and getting that help. Do you think that really, even in today's world where you're helping accelerate startups, do you find that pushing them into this modeling and understanding really puts a whole different perspective on their business and the future use case of this? That, hey, you know what, you might look good now, but 5 years from now, this business isn't really looking very good.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. So I've had many cases where I've provided guidance, and you just sort of ask the innocent questions like, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't reconcile with this. And because of that, they've affected some material pivots and changed their business model. So I'm here to ask the tough questions. When I ask for some of the data, you kind of have to also delineate between what's a proven fact, what's hard data, and what the assumptions are. And I personally always go in, well, this industry has a 90% failure rate, elephant in the room. So let's assume this company will fail. So you can almost have a checklist of it will fail if ... and then just list out all the stuff. It will succeed if ... And then you kind of need to distinguish between what are some assumptions you need to validate, what are hard data points now that still need to evolve over time. I've seen lots of cases where they're absolutely convinced that, like CAC, customer acquisition cost, is one of the core key metrics. And just because you're crushing it right now and your CAC right now is $10, but you're in some B2B SaaS, you're kind of playing the long game or the short game of you can get a few leads right now and your CAC is $10. But let's fast forward and think about what your CAC will be when your top of the funnel inbound needs to be 1,000 prospects a month, and you scale whatever sales and marketing campaigns because you're not maintaining that CAC. So again, like you said, you have to have sort of a forward-looking projection of the entire ecosystem, who the competitors are, who are the incumbents that you're dislodging, and so forth. So all these layers of complexity, and just making them think about that in some ways is intimidating, but it's sort of the things that they need to think about for like what the longer journey will look like.
And what I found I watched a lot of your videos that you guys put on in the early years of the battery, and I love them, by the way. They were very good.
Thanks.
Because they were informative, and they were challenging, and you broke them down into nice little, almost like a Twitter feed, which I think was great. because it was just small enough for me to take information in, go back, come in. It kind of talks a lot to what we're talking about now too, which is, the things that can cause pitfalls or the things that you got to look out for. So kind of as you went through the banking sector and you started to build up these metrics, you're also probably working with a lot of early stage companies, even in on the accounting banking side, because that's usually who's going to banks, right? And I find that operators in the bank side really just understand business in general a lot easier than the average person. And then when they do get in it, I find that LPs tend to always be, a lot of them are bankers because they see the opportunity. So they want to get into that investment. So it's either you're a banker or you're a lawyer. So lawyers get all the best deals and the bankers just have the risk analysis down so they can jump in and figure it out. So now you went and jumped into the startup world. What were some of the learnings you could take? And I know you got the top 10 list, top 12 lists. So you've got these lists. If you were to give like 5 things that really changed when you went from corporate to startup, what were those big things that you were just like, wow, I had no idea that this was going to happen. And I'm glad I learned this now. And now you're using these for your startups.
Yeah. So you're saying the biggest thing that kind of blindsided me, I guess. So one of the startups I was involved with, again, sort of, you saw that I have this passion for independent film and so forth. So getting into that, just rubbing elbows with the folks at Sundance, and I went to some director conferences and so forth. I mean, I loved it. So one of the startups that I did after that was actually a two-sided marketplace, which was supposed to represent the solution for distribution for independent filmmakers, for the ones that go on the festival circuit. And I went very deep down, working with the filmmakers. They loved me because I had a distribution solution that we were, creating theatrical events in public venues that weren't movie theaters, like bars and cafes and restaurants and so forth. And so they were the inventory supply. They wanted to get paid for it. And so I solved the problem for them, but it was a two-sided marketplace. And so one of the mistakes I made was that then when I focused on the demand side, I'd worked with schools. And I had this great independent film for children. And they said, that's great, but we really want to see Toy Story 4. So it basically was the supply-demand disequilibrium. So that got me then going to the studios. And I basically, at that point, it was early enough that digital rights management and digital distribution was early enough that, am I allowed to swear on your show or?
You know what? Sure. I had someone else do it once and we just kind of kept going, but you do whatever works. Whatever emphasize works, man. I'm working. Good.
We can bleep this out later, but basically I got from one of the studios, basically the thank you, fuck you document, which was their DRM requirements, which were this thick and something that we just could not bridge the gap between the studios and then the audiences. So I guess what I'm driving at was in recent years, I've gotten very academic about the whole value proposition, measurement, problem solution pairing, and just making sure that there's the right product market fit. And that was one of those powerful educational things that even though I identified a big value proposition on one side, it was not the monetizing side. And it sort of profoundly influenced me in terms of planning for making sure that you properly measure value proposition and you do enough work on the customer discovery upfront, just using some of the best practices with, Steve Blank's work and business model canvas and so forth.
So that value proposition, it is pretty significant because, it can't be lopsided because someone will always demand more and then it can cause the whole business model to crumble, especially if they're your first customer and they're trying to help you move forward.
Yeah.
So when you were kind of, I guess, really diving into this and started to kind of feel, wow, wait a sec, this isn't working out. And you had a solution and now you got to bring two sides to it and create this double marketplace. Did they give you the window to do that? Or did it cause a bigger failure and that you weren't able to overcome in the end?
Yeah, at that time, we were, the other important lesson is timing. You cannot be too late. You cannot be too soon. You have to be at the right place at the right time. We were too soon. We wanted to do high definition at a time when streaming high definition wasn't possible. We had to do it as progressive downloads and caching them just to prevent like, buffering issues and things like that. Plus, the studios just were not prepared to release their library into the digital realms. And, we were just trying to tap into the airplane release window. So again, our timing was wrong, and then we just did not have the product market fit at that time.
So does this give you, when you're working with your startups and they're coming to you with some innovative new tech, does this kind of give you more of a process for them to tackle these problems before they face them, so that they're not asking for Toy Story 4 when they're only at Toy Story 1?
No, exactly. It's I'll give you another good example is that when we have them prepare pitch decks, there is the market sizing slide, which we all know, TAM, SAM, SOM. And TAM and SAM are pretty easy. They're, you look it up and you get some Gartner report or something. You say it's a $20 billion market. Done, check. SAM is something similar, still top down. I push hard with my companies that SOM, serviceable obtainable market. You don't just say, oh yeah, here's SAM and I'm going to take 10% or 1% of that and check, I'm done. Show me a bottoms up calculation, how you do the numbers, and show me that it credibly ties to your sales and marketing plan, that you're able to get into channels and distribution partners, and that you have the staffing and the resources to do it. And let's do a real, credible, serviceable, obtainable market bottoms up with all those numbers. And then you will have something that credibly ties to the other slides in your deck, other materials that you have in your deal room. And you can credibly go also because you have a lot of supporting documentation that holds up everything that you did. Anytime you come and say, I think I'll get 1% of this market, I'm done. It basically holds no water for me.
I love it. I was going to say, if I was only recording this, since we're recording this, that's a perfect soundbite, because I see that so often where the level of detail that doesn't occur in that pitch deck, or mostly in the process of sales, is that it gets lost. And then when they do get to that slide, it's, I'm just looking for 1% to start. But what does that 1% really represent? And I think a lot of the time it's never done as a bottoms up. It's always bottoms down or top down. And that just becomes a buckshot spray, and you've never really built any process into it. And I think from some of the things that I've learned that you guys are doing is that, buckshot spray is not going to be effective. It's not going to work. So how do you get your teams to look at, and again, this goes into those next investment layers and de-risking your business. How do you get the startup to really understand that if you're going to go bottoms up and you're going to be more articulate on how you're going to acquire these, is there a process that you build in? So what does that repeat value look like? Can you build a team that does just keep cycling over repeat, so that you can keep closing business and then just stacking resources and technology on top of each other? And that's going to just keep closing your business and growing that overall funnel. Is there a process, or is there ways that you guys try to structure that to get a startup in line?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So a couple of things that are really important. So, and again, we didn't invent these things. These are just sort of academic best practices that have been taught that we're leveraging as well. One is the concept of the beachhead. What is your initial market entry point that gives you the best chance for success, and then the opportunity to move into subsequent segments or other verticals and so forth? And it is, again, a bottoms up exercise. The beachhead would just be, I consider it like the bowling pins. It's the first pin, and then you have a bunch of other pins behind it. And maybe all those pins together represent SOM, and you have to check off all of those. So how do you pick your first beachhead? I hate to see the company that says, well, we're SaaS, so we're going to do SME and we're going to do enterprise and we're going to do everything in between. And the truth is, you can't do everything because you only have so many resources. The sales cycle, if you're enterprise, if you were selling to me back when I was an executive at Wells Fargo Bank, the sales cycle would be potentially 18 months. It shrank a little bit now because of certain organizations having interest in working with startups, but it still potentially could be longer than the runway you have for your company before you hit your fume date. On the other side, the SME, it might be a good viable thing, but your CAC could be so high that your either your annual recurring revenues or your monthly, it might require you a year and a half to break even on that first acquisition. So that's where just geeking out on unit economics just to know what makes sense. And can you just get enough traction to show credibility for the model and investors will forgive that? Or are you truly on your own and are you going to have to try to be self-sustaining and viable? So all these things kind of come into play. But ultimately, just going back to the Beachhead thing, it's just making sure that you have all your ducks in a row, that you can just hit a market and then move to another sub-market after that and kind of grow into that SOM as best you can.
So I love that. And what I love about it is that the bowling pin structure that you're giving is that you have that first pin and then it spreads out. But the thing is, you've got to knock that first pin down before to knock down the rest. And I guess if people can put that in their mind, they start to realize, you're right, if I hit that first pin down, which is my beachhead, then that will open up the room for the next pins to be able to be accessible and then knock them down. What I find is that people are trying to line up, first pins, like 20 first pins. And they're like, well, I don't know what my beachhead is. And I'm just going to go after all of these. So how do you coach a business that has the energy, the drive, the 18 hours a day, 7 days a week mentality that you need to work more effectively and just go after that one pin first?
Yeah.
How do you change that mindset? Because I think we're all eager, and I think that's probably the biggest problem versus the best problem, is that how do you get them to focus and say, look, this is your first time. I've done this a million times. You really got to try and hone in on that one pin. Trust me, I'll save you a million hours. And it'll make your life easier. Just go for that one pin, and then the rest will be behind it, which means they'll all fall. How do you want to do that? How do you do that?
So I always say, first and foremost, the information that is in your prospective customer's head is so much more valuable than the information that's in your own head. So you do have to go out and do some field work. And the great thing is, by identifying your target customers and first approaching them to say, I'm doing a customer discovery exercise. I'd like to understand how you work, what your needs are, and have a conversation about that. You're not selling, but at the same time, you're kind of selling because you're planting the seed of your product in their heads. And then, but it's still a true market research exercise to just understand how they consume a product, what the incumbent product is, what it would take to dislodge the incumbent, which is absolutely critical. Beyond the costs of your product standalone, what's the cost of just migrating? Are they going to have a team of 1,000 people get trained, and then they have to have a big IT program? So you have to kind of think of all these things. And so we have, again, I'm originally a geeky spreadsheet guy. We have these worksheets, which we just have a beachhead analysis. And you do a side-by-side analysis of different verticals you could go in, different strategies. And we just ask simple questions. Does your target in that segment have the money? Do they have the willingness to change? And you can kind of score it. And just, it doesn't give you a definitive answer, but it gives you some structured way of thinking about competing beachhead strategies and which ones kind of filter to the top.
I love that. So one thing you said, which really stands out in that, was that you're having multiple conversations. And those conversations aren't to close them today. They're feeding the system to close at a later date, but you're putting this in their mind. So you're going after this beachhead. You've got pins that are lined up behind each other, and you're having conversations with the pins behind them, which could be in different verticals or different areas that you may tend to focus on, because you're putting the information in their heads to say, I'm coming back. This is where we are. So there's one thing that I think I'd love to add in there that I think really will help in that mechanism, which I'm sure is part of your beachhead process, is that as you're feeding the system, what you end up doing is every time you gain a win, that win gets pushed back to the line. So it gets thrown back to all the other pins, because what you're trying to create is this herd mentality of interest, and interest comes from wins. Nobody's really jumping on board and saying, hey, I heard you lost 10 million last week. Where can I sign up? But they're certainly on board when you say, I just closed Tim Hortons, and you're working with that next coffee maker or coffee company, and they want in. So those little types of wins build bigger wins with the next herd mentality. So you really do have to preface that sales funnel by getting out there and getting the opportunity to make those pitches and filling that information in, which eventually you'll continue to fill in And that's that growing of that pipeline, which is, you went to them a year ago. Now it's time to go back, but go back with some wins.
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, once you get somebody and you basically want to use that as a case study to say, hey, I got a win here. What were the metrics of success? So when you're selling something, you have to be able to say what's in it for them. If you pay me, $1,000 a month for the SaaS platform, you will get a 30% boost in employee productivity. You will have a 25% reduction in costs. Whatever their business case is, you actually need to understand that as well and be able to derive those KPIs, because that becomes critical for your marketing materials as well. Read our white paper, our case study. Customer X had a 25% reduction in costs by using our tool. That's much more powerful. Plus, you get the testimonials, and somebody else saying that you're great is so much more valuable than I saying that I'm great myself, because who am I to assess myself?
Well, I think you're doing great. So keep it going. And outside, you mentioned KPIs. Maybe you can dive in a little bit more on what that KPI structure would look like as a win, not just for the internal of your teams and your business, but what those KPIs will represent to the public when you're sharing those out. What type of things do people want to see so that they can get on board? And you mentioned some testimonials. What other elements really bring this home for customers to start onboarding themselves and not even bothering with you?
Yeah. So actually, one other thing I'll just share that sort of helps set up this as well as this is part of our curriculum as well, is that we very much believe in doing pilots with customers. So you basically want to de-risk it for the customer as much as possible. So, but you have to have a predetermined beginning and end. So let's say it's a finite period of time, 30 days, 90 days, whatever. And you need to have a commitment. Well, if I hit these KPIs, what happens? Well, you become a paying customer, you're going to pay this. And maybe because you're a beta customer, you'll get a 20% discount for the first year, yada, yada, yada. But also that we can use your KPIs to measure the successes. So part of it is just whatever the KPIs for the customer is. And it always depends. It's usually things like productivity gains, savings, cost savings, and so forth, or better customer acquisition, measures like that. So I would focus more on the success KPIs for the startups, which at the end of the day, again, this is sometimes a gross oversimplification, but I always condense startups to basically every startup out there just sells widgets. And you monetize the widget either one time, once a month, once a year, once a quarter, something like that. And there's a certain cash flow stream. Then you have the upfront acquisition costs. You have churn rate. Churn rate is absolutely critical. And basically getting into that transaction with one customer, to me, is like a building block of how you build up your business. And you have to show that, okay, customer X has this kind of profile because I can acquire them. I break even on customer X by the 4th month. It has a lifetime value of Y. And you can show that, like how it rolls together if you get a bunch of building blocks to the entire P&L of your company, at least on the margin, from acquiring more customers with that profile. So it's a little bit of a simplification because there are lots of models that don't apply to that. But at the end of the day, cash is king. Show me how you spend the money and how you recoup the money, and show me in a way that you can get up to the profit margin that you need to have a sustainable business, because you also have to cover fixed costs and so forth. Show me when you can break even on a per customer basis, that lifetime value. And like I said earlier, churn is one that is too often ignored. And I can't tell you how many times, I probably guess the first iteration of a financial model that I see from a startup, half the time they have not built in churn. It's just, you will lose customers. You cannot pretend that you'll acquire a customer and keep that customer forever. And as a startup, there's a very good chance that you will have worse than a 25% churn rate annualized. And so if you're not taking that into account, and all I have to do is flick one thing into your model, and I can completely blow up your model, that means you have to think about it. And so you can't say, well, I'm only going to have a 2% churn rate because, Google is going to lose customers today. Believe it or not, somehow Google will lose customers. And you're not better than Google. So take into account how to retain the customers, and also just remind founders, that it is so much cheaper to retain and do more work on the retention side than on the acquisition side. And those are the little things that, you don't do it once the ball's in motion. Lay that foundation early on at whatever way you can.
And that brings in that repetitive, that auto on button that just keeps repeating right inside. You're building off the same metrics that you close the beachhead with, and then you're just repeat, using the same style, maybe tweaking it here and there, but it's just that auto repeat.
Exactly.
So now we've gone through this, data, the bowling pins, getting into the information, mining that information, building KPIs, selling the product, getting into market, crushing it. Now let's take the first question, what we asked, and let's put the brakes on and say, now everything that you've learned being in startup world for the last 10 years, what would you go back to big business and say, hey, you're really doing this wrong? You learned a ton in startup world, and I think it's a total different understanding than how big business is doing it. So what advice would you go back to big business and say, hey, you know what? I learned a lot when I got into the startup world. I got punched in the face here by this instance. I learned about double marketplace and how to make things roll. Now take the other side and go back. What would you bring back to big business and do over?
So actually, some of the very things that I just told you about, like, using tools like the business model canvas and customer discovery and the value proposition canvas, I've actually been retained to do boot camps and workshops for large international corporations that also want to do that internal innovation thing. That it's clear that a lot of corporations want to dance in this space, and in some ways they might set up either an internal innovation group or the intrapreneur program or some other skunkworks or what have you. And at the end of the day, I've yet to see where it's blossomed. I've seen a few actually, and we have a couple of case studies where they've, I think Boeing had its own special skunkworks program for a jet and so forth. But generally speaking, a lot of the corporations that I've come across will give some lip service to it and try some things. And then at the end of the day, one of the other important ingredients that startups are actually good at is, doing more with very few resources and then being nimble and quick. So when I was at, one of my Fortune 100 jobs, I actually launched a product development process globally for the company. And it was sort of the academic classic 6-stage gate development process. It's sort of like, the what you were taught in business school. And nowadays, with lean startup and with agile development, as long as they have enough resources, they will still operate circles around you. So that framework, you cannot have sort of the disciplined 6-stage gate process, which means that it's at least 12 to 18 months to get a product to market. And in spite of that, historically, the product launch success rates were not any better than the lean ones. The better thing about lean is that you can iterate quick and hopefully pivot during the customer discovery a lot. So you still have to have a concentrated area of failure and just fail quick and then move on, and fail in a way that you don't kill your company. So that's the thing that I would love to impart in companies, in larger corporations. And I've yet to see firsthand where it actually flourished in a way that they absolutely embrace. Because at the end of the day, they still have to interface with other, silos within the company that just inherently bog down the system and slow it down. So I would love to see it. I still think the best way for corporations to interact, there are still great ways. They could still sponsor, accelerators. They could do skunkworks. They could have a corporate venture capital arm. So there are lots of ways of dancing around it. I've yet to see the perfect case study of innovation moving things quickly when it's still deeply embedded within sort of legacy systems.
I love it.
I hope to be proven wrong.
In time.
Yeah.
But I do love that. And again, it's a good way to circle back, because you've taken different learnings and said, hey, wait, there's something here that you're not doing, and I'm learning it. And I think it could be setting up an outside infrastructure that lets them run on their own, like a little mini entrepreneurship camp, or if it is going to be internally, you really do have to find some real driven, metric-based team that's going to be winning above what they're normally structured to do in big business, because that protocol and process side throws things down because they're always mitigating risk. And I think there was some crazy number, like it's 72% of all internal corporate projects fail. And I think it always falls back to the person driving it, because they never get to the end lengths because they don't envision all the moving pieces. They just envision the end goal, try to work their way back, and never really figure out how to get there because too many moving pieces, again, cause it to break down.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's fascinating. I think there's a ton of learning there. We're going to kind of keep moving our way through, but the next thing I want to chat with, and there's always this one, all the startups, and I think you guys have worked with over 1,000 startups now through the accelerator side. So you're probably going to have probably 100 stories about this, but we just need one that pops in your mind. And we're kind of looking for that story that really kind of just makes you feel like that's what it takes to be an entrepreneur. And it could just be anything where, you had a female founder that had to go through these things and then just made an amazing company, or didn't, or this guy had to do this. It's kind of that one where you're just sitting there and you're taking the story and you're like, wow, that's incredible. I was like positive, real driven. Can't believe they made that one through. Anything that comes to mind?
Let's think. So just the go-getter. We do have one company that was in Battery, a real estate tech startup, that probably the most driven, well-organized founder, absolutely systematic with engagement, communication, and just completely buttoned up. That really, it's what you want in all founders, because I've worked with a lot of founders that aren't particularly communicative, or they're communicative until they get your check, and then it's sort of like, oh, you were in the news, and then you emailed them and they're like, hey, how are you doing, but aren't giving updates. So it's that first of all, that if you were to email them, they'll get back to you like within 20 minutes, even if it's 11 o'clock at night or something like that. It's just like they're always on, they're passionate, they're driven, they have the right level of transparency, and just know how to work the system. And so the one founder that I'm thinking of that was so systematic in communicating, I've actually used as an inspiration for myself as well, because there is something there where he had assistants that basically managed LinkedIn and so forth. And still, I mean, he didn't farm it out. He's still very personalized and communicative, but it's just made the communication at an art form in terms of engagement.
I love it. And you're bang on that. The tough thing about not just being in startup world, but just in general, when you're growing that business, that communication becomes the lacking piece, because you're always head down, working hard. And I think founders forget that they've got investors all throughout the stages, and that everybody's looking for information. And if you don't feed it, then everybody's coming to you, which means you're creating more workflow for yourself. So the easier way you can be systematic and push that out will save you a lot of effort on this side and allow you to keep moving forward. And even if it is your head down at that point.
Exactly.
I love it. And it's a very valuable lesson for startups to pay attention to. We're going to jump into our rapid fire questions.
Okay.
All right. First question. Why do you invest in startups?
Diversified portfolio. Basically, some of the money's in conservative stuff and some's just going for the home runs. But more importantly, I love this space. I want to be an entrepreneur, and investing in companies then empowers you to live vicariously through companies that are doing the kinds of things you want to do. And, sometimes you get to be a little bit more hands-on. One example, and like I said, it lets me do things that I'm not qualified to do. So another one of my passions beyond filmmaking is actually spirits. So I tinkered with some technologies to artificially age spirits and turn a white spirit into a brown spirit like in a week. And I did it myself. I got like pressure chambers and did a lot of research, and there were some out there. and it looked great. It tasted like crap. So I basically connected with somebody that's sort of on the cutting edge of this called Lost Spirits, and they're going gangbusters. They're opening up this huge facility in Vegas now. And so as soon as I saw what he's doing with his reactors, I realized, wow, he's working at a level that I could never dream of doing it. So I might as well be along for the ride with him and, get to see his successes. And, I kind of gave away my equipment to a different startup that used it for a different use case. So, it's like I said, just having fingers in a lot of fun pies.
I like it. That's awesome. How did you get started investing in startups?
Actually, it predated Berkeley Angel Network. It was basically a friend of mine starting a company. And so it was like sort of, hey, you want to help here? And I'm like, okay. And then the important thing was the distinction between, for lack of a better term, dumb money, because, first efforts were like dumb money versus being exposed to, oh, this is how you do it at an angel group. And there's a screening committee, and this is how they review deals. And this is how you do due diligence. And just being on a due diligence team to teach me about best practices, I think that was absolutely invaluable to just make sure that you not only do it for the love, but that you effectively, de-risk it for yourself as you get into it.
I love it. And your favorite part of investing?
Working with entrepreneurs, honestly. It's sharing some nuggets of wisdom, even if it's my failures, that cause some sort of pivot or course correction that wouldn't have happened if I weren't there. That to me is like one of the most gratifying things.
Perfect. How many companies do you invest in per year?
Personally, it might be fewer than like 5 or 6. And then through Battery, it would be, I guess we do about 2 cores, so maybe about 30 or so.
Well, you're way above average, so it's awesome.
Yeah.
Any verticals you like to focus on?
So I've always said I'm vertical agnostic because I like to go where the opportunity leads me. I mean, the last one I did was a life science one, a dental one. And again, it was where I have no domain expertise. I'm not qualified to do life science. I have to rely on people that are smarter than me. So, jokingly, I like to say I like to just invest in pre-unicorns, but, I don't expect the unicorn. But I just look for those that are the best upside potential. So I'm not swayed by the flavor du jour, be it, AI or VR, AR, or whatever. It's investing in things that have identified a product market fit, have some sort of unfair advantage in the marketplace, and then could succeed by just the sheer execution. So, and it could be anything.
I like it. I also felt very market agnostic. And then after 5 years, I went and evaluated what I invested in. And I realized that it happened to be just the areas that I did a lot of stuff in. So as much as I thought I was like, no, man, I'm all over. And then when I looked at it, I'm like, damn it. So I guess you tend to bend to the things that you really understand because it's faster for you to say, I like that, than it is, like you said, going into it. Maybe you learn more from an angel group. You saw some leads. You're like, I'm into that. So it kind of progressively you keep learning, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So in the due diligence side, is there certain areas that you require in order to make an investment in the due diligence process? If you don't have it, you're out?
Generally, I personally do not like the, hurry, the clock is ticking. There's a mad feeding frenzy on this one. Come in and we don't really have much in our deal room for due diligence. Like I said, I actually like to look at the numbers, not because they're right. I know they're wrong, but it's just that they're credible and cohesively tie together the entire narrative. So I've passed on companies that I went very far along, but I just did not see the hockey stick that you're supposed to see. Whatever way you model out the hockey stick, it has to, the ingredients to the stew have to corroborate that. And so I ultimately want to make my own conclusion, not be pressured into hurry, time's limited. We're about to close in a week. I'm not swayed by that.
I love it.
I might miss out on things here or there, but c'est la vie.
I think there no problem in the world has to be solved in 10 seconds. I think you always have some time, and if you can't find the time, then it's not worth the hustle, because I think it's the pressure doesn't create the value. So
yeah,
I wholeheartedly agree that. Outside of paperwork, and are there other things, factors? You mentioned obviously the entrepreneur. So is that kind of the number one factor that gets you involved, and then that's it, or there's team, or is there process?
So overall, one of our other investment philosophies is, generally startups fail, but we also know why they fail. So a lot of the studies have shown that team, to your point, team and product market fit account for 80% of startup failures, which is one of the reasons within our DealEngine analytical framework, we deconstruct to focus specifically on team, product, market, and money. And those 4 separate drivers are measured and assessed. I'll double click on the team thing because that is absolutely so important. I have worked with founders in the past that, granted, there's something called coachability, which every founder needs to be coachable. Even though I've got lots of gray hairs, I'm coachable as well. I need to be able to take in feedback from multiple sources. Some of the advisors might contradict each other, but I take it all in and can process it. I have worked with founders that are not coachable, and they just argue. And I can give stories of, arguing that they're going to defy the laws of advertising physics and achieve a better, cost per action result than some of the best, marketing PhDs out there, and somehow perform magic arbitrage on Google AdWords and things, or AdSense and so forth, or AdWords. And what happens then is they fail in the portfolio. And then we're like, I was not surprised that happened, because they literally argued with me about things that didn't make sense. So team is an absolute critical one. And so some of the work that we do at DealEngine is that we do a lot of analysis, not just on, or we try to avoid some of the analytical self-fulfilling prophecies that are demographic stuff, because you might get into a cycle where it's like, oh, look, here's some dudes that graduated from Stanford and then got a job at Google. They're the best profile for startup founders. We know that entrepreneurism thrives across the spectrum. And there are other measures, even in psychometric measures, things like emotional intelligence, grit, visionary skills, salesmanship. And those are the kinds of things that we actually are systematically measuring now to just make sure that the team itself has the right psychographic profile that aligns with what a successful founding team would need to succeed.
Awesome. Very well shared. Do you like to lead rounds?
Yeah, I am personally a follower.
Okay. Do you have preferred terms? Like pref shares, common shares? You're pretty open?
I'm open to all of the above. I tend to sometimes negotiate. I sometimes prefer not just being the passive investor along for the ride, that I do ask, I'd like to be on your board of advisors. I think that's one of the things that, again, data shows companies are more successful and are more likely to succeed if they have more engagement with investors and advisors. So this was from an angel investor return study a few years ago, a multi-year study, thousands of angel investors. If the founding team only engaged an average of twice a year with their advisors and investors and advisors, they are 3 times less likely to succeed than if they engage twice a month. So that engagement actually helps, just because it provides that diversity in perspective, and just learn from our mistakes that we will see things that sometimes that they're bored with, that they might engage with, might not have that same focus. So a good, well-rounded board of advisors is absolutely key.
I love it, and wholeheartedly, 100% hands down agree with that. The numbers show it, prove it, but the founders just don't tend to look at that as a opportunity. Just like they don't tend to look at it that all of these people on a board or investors are actually a gateway into more sales, more opportunities for the business. And I think that somewhere that education needs to be ramped up and changed, because you brought these people in, figure out how to utilize them. They're key assets and they've got a ton of experience.
Yeah. Well, we totally teach that in our course. Once a month, give an update and end it with, here's my ask of you. Here's what I need of you. I need an introduction to somebody in, enterprise SaaS. Just make one introduction this month, or give me to, one investor. If you don't ask, you're not going to get those resources. And that's what they're there for. They want you to succeed.
Agreed. Yeah, I've been learning that one. If you don't ask, you can't get it.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to ask than it is to do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you do follow-up investments?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it depends. I like them when they're available and if it makes sense.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, we're gonna shift a little bit more again. One more shift into the personal side.
Okay.
But thank you. That was great. Okay. So first personal question: what is your superpower?
My superpower. It's probably geeky, but the spreadsheet thing is one thing that has not left me. I think it was such a formative thing that quantifying just about anything is my natural thing, that if there was a task to get into, I would typically still start in a spreadsheet. And whatever it is, if it's a sales funnel, some sort of waterfall analysis, it's just my impulse is to quantify it. And the other one that I guess you already asked for one, so I'll stop there.
No, fire away. Keep going. This is good.
I've always had this knack for having the ability to see disparate connections and bringing them together. If it's somebody to help the company or it's a new market opportunity. So it's that out of the box thinking that I don't know. It's helped in that I've introduced new random disparate business models to companies, and they're like, we didn't think about that, which is always fun too.
You're all around full-fledged problem solver.
I try. I'm a student of the whole problem solution value prop. So I live and breathe for that. In fact, I teach a course called What's Your Problem, which is all about problems. So yes, I guess you're spot on.
Yeah, I think that might fit then. Yeah, I like that. That's awesome. You can't get any more lined up than that, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Much streamlined. Okay, so what's your favorite sports team?
Oh, the San Francisco Giants. Big baseball fan.
All right.
I mean, actually, and the Golden State Warriors. I'll cheat. I'll say too.
That's okay. That's all right. They're not a bad team. The Raptors, I think, would. This year they're not so good, but last year they could have done something. 2 years ago.
Well, the Raptors, we still have some painful memories from that series, but I'm getting over it slowly.
Oh, you guys had some amazing games, and somehow we pulled it off. So at the end, outside of that one injury that happened at the very end, pretty tight game, man. I'm not even sure how we pulled it off. So either way,
I was happy for the Raptors, and more happy to give it to them than the Cavaliers or any LeBron team. But
very true. Very true. Okay, favorite movie, and what character would you play in the movie?
Wow. My favorite movie, probably the one that is probably the best cathartic moment of all time was Shawshank Redemption, which was, the prison movie.
Yep.
And can I choose not to be anything in that movie? Because that was like pretty grim movie to live through. My second favorite would be The Matrix, which I think was just brilliant. And I would pick Neo from The Matrix if I could be the one.
I've actually, in all of the interviews I've done, a few people have actually picked Shawshank, just like that, just like you did. You were just like Shawshank, and I was like, I have to go rewatch this movie. I've seen it many of times, but it's been a long time. But I'm going to actually look this up. I might watch it tonight.
Watch it.
Yeah, it is a great movie.
It takes you to the depths of hell and miserableness.
Yeah.
But then again, if you haven't seen it, I don't want to give away the punchline in case people haven't seen it.
Yep.
But it is the kind of movie that just gives you that emotional lift, and just the down and the up are just made the experience amazing.
It's kind of the world of going through defeat in the long play, letting everybody feel you've been defeated.
Yeah.
And then in the end, You actually were planning this and you won the whole time. So
Yes.
have you seen the movie Papillon?
Yes. Yes.
It kind of has that same resemblance,
Same prison.
right?
Yeah.
You've beat me up. You think you've won, but this whole time I've been living in my own head and I've actually left a long time ago.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I love it. Very cool. And of course, Matrix, always sick. And and Neo's a great character in that. I haven't started that series over, but I do like to late night go through old series and I just watch them over and over. Meaning find old series that I haven't seen in a long time and watch them. So I finished just recently doing, oh my God. Now I'm going to have a brain fart on it. I should have just said it. You know, when you're going to pop in your head and then you forget what it was. There's 5 Underworld. Have you seen Underworld? It's the vampires and werewolves. It's called Underworld.
Oh, yeah. I have to admit, I have not seen those.
Oh, they're awesome.
I've never been a vampire person. Like, I just have not liked vampire series for some reason.
This one is really well done.
Okay.
It's probably one of the better ones I find that have been ever tried to accomplish this. And they use tech all the way through, and the technology just gets better and better from when it started to where it ends. But either way, I went through that one and I just finished it. It's been a few months of trying to get time to watch it. And now, but again, very well done. All of the movies, I think there's 4 or 5 of them, but they've done a pretty good job. So
I will tell my wife that this might be weekend binge watching time.
Well, you gotta like them. So you gotta like werewolves and Wolverines, or werewolves and vampires. But it is good.
Okay, so, good. Duly noted.
But Cal, I want to thank you very much for all your time today. I learned a lot, and like I always do, even though I try to get away from taking notes, I can't help it. I hear great things, and I want to write them down so that I can talk about them after. But brilliant. I love what you guys have done. And again, it was great to spend some time and to learn more about how you think, what you've been doing, and how you've got to where you are today. And the way we like to end the show is we like to leave you the last word. So anything that you want to share to a startup or to investors, I leave it to you. But again, thank you for all your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, JP. My last word is, in case there are startups that are within earshot of this, so DealEngine.ai is taking applicants into our beta program now, completely free, non-dilutive. And all we do is we help you, provide some mentorship, take some data from you, and do some analytics. So go to DealEngine.ai/beta and tell them Cal sent you through JP's show, and hopefully we can help you succeed.
I love it. Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, JP. It's been a pleasure.
Have a great day. Thanks again.
You too. Take care. Bye.
Oh, that was brilliant. Great job by Cal, and shared a lot of great information. I love the bowling pin analogy, just by the fact of way you can envision rolling those pins, and especially in that sales cycle, the beachhead being that number 1 pin, hit that down and it knocks the rest. I think that was just well shared out. And I think startups, investors really need to hone in on that side of things when it comes to your business. How do I set it up so that I can get that first pin lined up, so that I can keep auto repeating and hit that button so that it just keeps occurring to bring that in. I love the Shawshank movie. I am going to spend some time to watch that. And then, of course, I think on the other side where he talked about DealEngine.io, I think that's another great platform that they're putting together. So at the end, build your KPIs, build your funnel, line those pins up, knock them down, and then just keep auto repeating. Thank you again for all your time, everybody. Like us, share, add us on Facebook, LinkedIn. Looking forward to seeing you guys all soon again. Thank you.